well, 1 o'clock in South African time, and I guess 11 a.m. your time. Yeah.
Yes.
And maybe we'll just give it 2 minutes, and so we allow more people to come in, because we so we're capped at 100, but other people can join. I think the other 100 over that can join via the live Facebook page. So yeah. Okay, I think we are at 2 minutes past, so probably we should just get going, so that we also don't eat on Yaw's time, and start to apologize for that. So Yaw Bediako was born in Aberdeen, in the coldest part of Scotland, probably very windy, and there are days where you don't see the sun. But anyway, he now lives in Ghana. I think it's very sunny on that side. He did his PhD in Northwestern University in Chicago, and then did his first postdoc in Cambridge, Wellcome Trust in Kenya. And then we met at the Crick Institute when we were both postdocs there. I was doing my first postdoc. He was on his second postdoc. And I mean, at the time it was, it used to be called NIMR, which was an institute slightly outside London, north of London. And it was a really great place, I thought, before it moved to central London in King's Cross. So in 2019, he then moved to Ghana to take up a faculty appointment there in the West African Center for Cell Biology of Infectious Pathogens. And then when the Crick Africa Network Fellowship was established, he was one of the first recipients for that. And then in 2020, so believe it or not, in the middle of a pandemic, in June, he founded a company, Yemaachi Biotech, and which it basically focuses on immunogenetics, and it's based in Accra. And I think they've been doing lots of interesting things recently. You would have seen probably an HPV kit that the company has produced. And they promise to do other more interesting things, I think, in the future. And recently he was selected as the Celestius Tumor Science Leadership Fellowship. I think I did butcher that word, but I do apologize. And this is by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And he's also a fellow of the Ghana Young Academy and an affiliate member of the African Academy of Sciences. So thank you very much, Yaw. We really look forward to your talk. And also, how do you actually start a startup company in the middle of pandemic when everyone is all locked down and worrying about all sorts of things?
All right. Thank you, Sabelo. Thanks for that very kind introduction. I hope everybody can hear me okay.
And yes, I was born in Aberdeen, which is one of the coldest places in Scotland. But grew up mostly in Ghana. So I guess those are two extremes. So I'm very happy to be here. And yes, we did found a startup in the middle of the pandemic. I guess the joys of being in Africa, where life has seemingly tried to continue on despite the pandemic, and hopefully we're coming to the end of it. But I'm very happy to be here today. I'm going to try and share my screen. So hopefully everybody hope you can all see my screen now. Great. When Sabelo asked me to speak at this, I asked permission to not do too much immunology. I'm sure there'll be subsequent speakers who would give you, quote unquote, proper scientific talks. But I thought it might be nice to start off this seminar series with a slightly different story, a story that is not too common yet on the African continent, but one that I think will hopefully become more common over the coming years as more and more capacity is built. And in my opinion, is actually a very important step that African scientific research needs to begin to take. And I'll try to explain why I think biotech is so important for the African scientific ecosystem, tell you a bit about Yemaachi and the work we're doing, and hopefully leave a little bit of time for discussion and questions afterwards. So I'll start off with, some statistics that may or may not be familiar to everybody. We all know Africa's population accounts for, somewhere around 60% of global population. However, unfortunately, we produce less than 1% of the world's research output, which is, a significant gap, a significant shortfall, and likely is part of the reason for many of the challenges that we currently see on the African continent. You can see on this graph taken from a World Bank report, it's slightly dated, but I think it still shows, I don't think the numbers have changed too much, unfortunately, over the last 9 years or so. You can see that South Africa as a country outperforms pretty much the rest of the continent. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. But much of, the whole of Africa basically underperforms Malaysia in terms of scientific research output. And though there have been some gains over time, we're still woefully short. And this is depicting based on the number of articles published, which is a relatively good metric for at least showing research output. Whether it's translated, we don't know, but at least in terms of just publications. Now, if we now look at, maybe taking it from just a publication to actual patents, which are usually results or products of science, we see once again that Africa really falls far behind. You can see how China has emerged as a force in research over the last decade or so. So this goes up to 2019. The line you see shooting up into the sky is China, and you can see rapidly from before 2000, China was a lot like any developing country, but between 2000 really exaggerated, accelerating between 2010 and 2019. You see a sharp increase in number of patent applications that logged by China. By comparison, Africa actually has seen a decline. So between 2009 and 2019, it may be a little bit small, but hopefully you can see we went from 0.7% of global patent applications to 0.5%. Whereas, Asia, driven largely by China, went from 50% to 65%. The US dropped slightly as a proportion, probably due to the increase from China. Now, if we look at actual numbers as opposed to percentages, the story is even more sobering. So Africa as a whole in 2019 logged 16,000 patent applications. This is in comparison to 2 million applications from Asia, about 1.4 million of those coming from China. Europe had 363,000, and you can see the rest. So this is a real problem. To have 16% of the world's population and yet only produce 16,000 patents in a year, when China, a single country like China, produced 1.4 million, suggests that Africa as a continent has a long way to go if we are really going to, make a contribution globally to research, but also solve the myriad of problems that we find around us. So why is this the case? Why does African research produce so little? And I think you can, as with most things, it's usually money. And this graph, also taken from the 2014 World Bank report, suggests that, across Africa, with the exception really of a few countries, many countries in Africa are spending very little on research. So Ghana, less than 0.5% of our GDP. Nigeria, even lower, less than 0.25% of their GDP. You can see South Africa is between 0.5 and 1%. By comparison, the US, that we all know has a very large GDP, spends 2.8% of its GDP on research. That's what this GERD stands, gross domestic expenditure on research. Malaysia spends 1.3% on research, and that is up from 0.2% in 1996. So the first figure I showed you showing the steep rise in Malaysia's research output is directly linked to the government deciding to put more money into research domestically. Now, this is data from South Africa, and we saw that South Africa was the best performing of the African, so basically on the African continent. And this is, I think, a great figure to show a direct correlation between GERD basically domestic expenditure on research and research output. As South Africa began to increase local support for research, it was directly correlated with a steep increase in research output. In science, we like figures that tell stories. I don't think you'll find any better figure than this in terms of the effect of the government deciding to spend money on research and the direct results in having a lot more publications. Now, of course, we know the struggle the South African government has had recently in terms of cutting expenditure, as many countries have had to do. But I hope that South African government would look at figures like this and realize that if anything, they need to try to increase the support, and other African governments need to follow suit if we are to try to become competitive with the rest of the world. So if our governments don't fund research, then who funds our research? Well, these are a few examples. There are many more. And the Academy of Science is really there. It's not really a funder so much as lately has been a grant manager. The funds themselves come from overseas. So the NIH, the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, USAID, the UK government, the Japanese government, the World Bank, what have you. All of us listening on this call who have done research in Africa are probably dependent on one, if not more, of these agencies. I can say for myself, I've never received any money for any research I've ever done from my government locally. All the research I've done has been funded by foundations or overseas governments. And that, I don't have to explain to you, sets up a very serious situation where our science is not self-sustainable. So the last 10 years, though, have seen, or maybe even more, probably 15 years, have seen almost there's been a boom in African science, if I would call it that. A lot of it focused on capacity development. So capacity development has almost become cliched. Every grant you put in these days includes a capacity development portion. There's been a lot of lip service and a lot of money, admittedly, spent on building capacity on the African continent. The World Bank alone has spent over $500 million in establishing centers of excellence to support scientific training and research on the African continent. The Wellcome Trust established a Deltas program that did something similar. The NIH is constantly pumping money into different initiatives, including H3 Africa and a number of others that may be familiar to people on this call. We hear about sustainability. We hear about contextual relevance. We hear about adaptability. We hear about being African-led. We could have a whole discussion about whether or not these things are actually true of African science. But the focus certainly has been on capacity development. Now, while that is good, I believe it also establishes a big problem that we're currently facing on the African continent. Majority of these initiatives have focused almost exclusively on training masters and PhD level people to sort of create a workforce, a scientific workforce that is envisioned to transform the scientific landscape on the continent. The problem is we haven't done anything about creating an enabling environment. So we're training all these people, really talented, bright, enthusiastic young people, but we're not thinking about what they're going to do post-degree. And so many people are getting drained out, either perhaps to South Africa. So when I talk about this, but even within South Africa, I think there's considerable strain on resources. So outside of South Africa, many people who get training on the African continent really find no home besides maybe lecturing in a university. And based on, from those of us who have trained abroad, very, very small fraction of people who get PhDs want to become lecturers. People want to do research, they want to do other things. Unfortunately, we don't have that support in our ecosystem. And so in my opinion, what the biggest achievement you could say of the capacity development efforts over the last few years was actually to make our brain drain more expensive. We used to lose people after high school when they went abroad for a first degree. Now we lose them after a PhD. And so we've actually created a situation where the brain drain has not really stopped. It has just gotten more expensive. So what do we do about that? And this is where I think biotech has a role to play. If you look in Europe, you look in North America, they have great academic, public and private academic centers of research excellence. And then of course you have big pharma companies, of which there are very few because they keep buying everybody else, who really drive production of new therapies, new diagnostics. But in between, you have a huge $700 billion industry of biotech, ranging from tiny companies to really large biotechs that actually look like big pharma. And what these companies do is drive innovation from academia to pharma. And yet on the African continent, well, we have some academic research and pretty much that's all. We don't really have big pharma, and we certainly don't have biotech. And I don't think we can get big pharma till we have biotech. We won't attract, we complain about pharma not paying attention to the African continent. That may be because we just don't have enough private research enterprise going on. So you can see Africa and the Middle East account for only 18 billion of the $700 billion pie. And that is not good enough for a continent as rich and as diverse and as large as the African continent. So as a scientist, as an academic, myself, who had done 2 postdocs, like Sabelo mentioned, who had returned to Ghana, took up a position at the University of Ghana as a research fellow at WACBIP, which is itself one of these World Bank funded centers of excellence. Initially, I thought I'd arrived. I was coming to become a PI, become a professor as quickly as I could, have a research group, and really train the next generation. But we keep talking about the next generation. And I felt, well, I was part of the next generation at some point in time. Why do we keep focusing on training? The university is also a somewhat frustrating place to work. I'm sure many of us who work in universities will agree. In fact, whether you're in Europe, North America, or anywhere else, universities can be frustrating because they're big bureaucratic dinosaurs in many ways. As somebody who wanted to do impactful science, and science that could be translated, I began to push against the idea of just being purely an academic scientist. And so I thought, one thing I could do is try to start a biotech company. And the reason I thought it was important was because there's really nothing like that in Africa. And it came down to a fact that if I had this idea and I didn't follow through with it, likely one of my students would do it one day and I may have to go ask them for a job. And I thought that would be really upsetting if I hadn't tried to do it myself. So really that was the final push that, I have this idea. If I don't at least try it out, I'll always kick myself for not trying. And I was sufficiently frustrated with the university that it was either that or leave. And I didn't want to leave Africa. And so I felt that this was worth a shot. So that's what gave birth to Yemaachi Biotech. We aim to be Africa's cancer research company, focused almost exclusively on cancer research, although we are open to a few other areas. And our mission is to diversify precision oncology. So I'm going to tell you briefly about the journey and then tell you about Yemaachi and where we are currently. So just as a quick summary, the idea for Yemaachi is actually not terribly old. It was 2018, 2019 when I began to think about doing this. So actually, as I entered the University of Ghana, it didn't take me very long to begin to start thinking, is this really where I want to be? I began to get advice and talk to a lot of people. In 2020, we were fortunate enough, I had a group of people around me and we registered the company. Registered the company with no money, right? But it's chicken and the egg. You can't raise investment till you have an entity in which people can invest in. So we took a leap of faith, put a bit of our money down and registered the company, but we didn't have anything else. Then began the hard work of trying to raise investment, both locally and externally. And answer questions if people have about that. It is very, very difficult, and grad school does not prepare you for it. At that point, I'd done 19 to 20 years of posts, including my PhD. So basically postgraduate research and then postdoc. And I was completely unprepared to try to be an entrepreneur. But you learn, one thing a PhD trains you to do is learn quickly. And so I learned fast. By 2021, we have established a lab. That's a picture actually of our lab, of one of our staff working in the hood. So that is all, the lab is completely privately funded, completely independent, did not exist at all before we started. We were fortunate to be admitted into Y Combinator, which is arguably the world's leading accelerator for startups. We're one of only 15 African companies in our batch out of a total of almost 400 from a pool of 15,000 applicants. So we were very grateful and fortunate to get admitted into Y Combinator. They invested in us, as did a number of other people who came on once Y Combinator came in. And as we talk now in 2022, we are now building partnerships across Africa. In fact, South Africa should be there. We have a partnership now with the University of Cape Town with H3D, and also are building activities in addition to Ghana in Nigeria and Kenya. So what is Yemaachi? So that is sort of the journey, but now I'll tell you a little bit about what Yemaachi is and why Yemaachi exists. When we think about cancer, or when we think about African health, we usually don't straight away go to cancer. We go to malaria, HIV, tuberculosis. Now, not to downplay those, but probably the biggest threat to health of people on the African continent right now is actually cancer. And unfortunately, people of African descent all over the world are suffering from high mortalities due to cancer. So Black women are more likely to die from breast cancer. Black men are more likely to die from prostate cancer. Pediatric cancers have a very, very abysmal cure rate in Africa compared to North America or Europe, where 80 to 90% of children with cancer are cured. In Africa, it's less than 40%. Now, I said that malaria, TB, HIV are not the only problems that Africa faces. And that is, if you look at the numbers, is borne out. So about 700,000 deaths attributed to cancer every year in Africa, and that is probably a huge underestimate due to poor record keeping. By comparison, we have about 400,000 to 500,000 malaria deaths every year. You have probably a similar number of HIV deaths. So malaria and HIV together are barely more than the cancer deaths we have on the continent. And yet, if you looked at the research being done in Africa, it's almost entirely all in infectious disease. So not to say that we should not continue infectious disease research, but Africa's health problems are more than infectious disease. As our populations age, as HIV control gets better and people live longer, whatever be the case, cancer rears its head. And if we don't address NCDs, including cancer, quickly and decisively, we will have a huge problem on our hands going forward. And unfortunately, cancer care is much more expensive and much more complex than typical treatments for most infectious diseases. And that creates a huge strain on our already fragile health systems. Now, when we think about cancer care, we're in the age of precision medicine. Majority of new therapies and diagnostics for cancer are targeted at specific populations or targeted at specific components of our genome or our immune system. Unfortunately, the data that has been used to generate all these solutions is largely European. So 78% of global genomic data is European, 2% is Black or of African descent. That creates a serious problem when you're trying to enter an age of precision medicine, because your training sets don't include large numbers of people on the globe, and certainly don't include African people. Very few clinical trials are done involving people of African descent. So that is creating a system where, going too fast. That creates a system where precision medicine is no longer precise and is actually exacerbating health disparities. And there's a number of publications, commentaries coming out now talking about this growing problem. And it's a problem that is only going to get worse unless something is done about it. Now, having said that, Africa is also home to the world's most genetically diverse human population. In fact, nearly all human genetic diversity can be found on the African continent. And so the best place to do human genomics is actually Africa. And yet it is the least studied population. So we're sitting on a gold mine, as is depicted in this publication that came out in 2020, demonstrating that 400 whole genomes led to the discovery of 3 million new hitherto uncharacterized variants. So there's a lot to understand about human evolutionary history, human health, yes, genetic susceptibility to disease by just studying the African continent. So at Yemaachi, our goal is to leverage that resource, that is the African genome, to diversify and expand access to precision diagnostics and therapeutics. And simply, very simplistically, our idea is to collect and sequence samples from cancer patients across Africa, build the most diverse data being different types of expertise to bear. This is our lab in Accra, where we're building up a molecular diagnostic and whole genome sequencing lab, where the base of our operations sort of in West Africa, but with time we are planning to scale across the continent. So over the last few months, we've built up a number of relationships. We now have relationships in 4 African countries, so Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, and we have a growing number of partners around the world who are looking to work with us on different research initiatives. I'll skip through here, just tell you a little bit about a couple of projects that we're doing. One is what we call AMBER, which is a liquid biopsy, looking at really building up liquid biopsy capacity on the African continent. Liquid biopsy is basically a blood test for cancer, so it gets around the challenges of taking a tissue biopsy, which is much more invasive. And so we're doing this project with Lucent to really understand how their liquid biopsy works in an African population, and hoping to optimize it sufficiently for use among people of African descent. Now, this is an immunology group, so I'll talk a little bit about immunology. Like I said, even though we're focused primarily on cancer, when good grant opportunities present themselves outside of cancer, we will take a look. And so what we've done with Heritage is really try to understand COVID-19 vaccine responses. This is funded by the Gates Foundation as part of a fellowship awarded to me, the Callister Tumor Fellowship that Sabelo mentioned. And what we're doing here is a very deep phenotyping of immune responses among an African cohort of 300 people who were following for 12 months after they received their COVID-19 jab. And we're looking at a variety of immune markers, looking at a number of factors that may affect their ability to respond to the vaccine. And we're collaborating with the CRIC, where Sabelo and I first met. The CRIC have a cohort of their own that they call Legacy. And these are obviously UK-based people. So it gives us a great opportunity to compare immune responses to the same vaccine in a population living in Africa and a population living in the UK. And we all, it's well documented how environment can affect the response to a vaccine. And so we're looking to see whether or not a combination of genetics, but also most likely environmental exposure to other pathogens could potentially affect how people in Africa may respond to vaccines. And this has bearing beyond COVID vaccines. There's a lot of data, or at least anecdotal data, showing that vaccines in general have different efficacy or lower efficacies when used in African populations than when used in other populations. The mechanism of this has never been successfully teased out, but we're hoping to shed some light on that. So this is just a study design, just to give you a little bit more info. Since it was an immunology talk, I thought I should at least show that I can do immunology. So I'm not just now a businessman. So this is sort of the study design. We're following people for 12 months, as I said, 7 different time points. We're collecting samples to test them for COVID, so we can identify breakthrough infections. We're going to be looking at cytokine profiles. We're going to look at protein peptide arrays, looking at antibody responses across different variants, looking at T-cell specific responses, and then doing a number of omics, both looking at genomic, so doing genomic sequencing to see whether or not there are any genomic associated differences or genome associated differences in immune response, but then also looking at the transcriptome over time, seeing how it changes and trying to correlate that with vaccine or with natural infection with SARS-CoV-2 and seeing how that is affecting how people are mounting different immune responses. We will be doing serology, looking at neutralization assays to look at antibody responses, and then trying to hone in on the cellular response by looking at the clonality of the responses and seeing whether or not we can associate any differences between either within our cohort in Ghana, but then also with the cohort in the UK. So I'll round up with a few lessons. I mean, this was really about starting about the company and what we've managed to learn. I think that, what I've learned so far, first of all, as I said, grad school really doesn't teach you to be an entrepreneur. You learn a lot in grad school in the life sciences. It prepares you in certain ways to absorb information very quickly, but we really don't understand, how to be an entrepreneur. And I've had to learn that on the fly, so the school of hard knocks, as it were. But it is possible. It's just that you have to prepare yourself. That's a very steep learning curve. Just because you have a PhD in immunology or microbiology doesn't mean you know anything about how to run a business and all the intricacies that exist in that world. If you're going to do this, you need to plan and get extensive help. So you need to be very humble and ask a lot of questions, even the dumb ones or the seemingly dumb ones. You don't do this just on a whim. I think you have to try and plan. We have still not succeeded yet, right? We're still on the journey. But I think any success we have had has been due to being careful and planning and taking our time. You can expect rejection. It happens, especially when you're trying to raise money. But don't give up. I heard lots of no's before I heard my first yes in terms of trying to raise money for this. And I'm sure more no's will come. But if you are convinced about what you're trying to do, you just have to keep going, learn from the experience, take the constructive criticism, and just move forward. And that goes to the next point about learning and adapting. In this area, you're always learning from people you talk to, learning from the environment, and you need to be willing to adapt. Your initial vision may have sounded great, and it may be great, but it may not work. And you need to be humble enough to pivot and adapt if necessary. Team is crucial. This may have started off in my head, but it would still be in my head if I didn't have a good team. And so you need to find people who can share your vision, who bring complementary but not necessarily overlapping skills, especially in the early stages where you have a small team and you need to bootstrap. You need to have people who are adding to what you're trying to do, not subtracting, and maybe not duplicating as well. But team is everything. Team is extremely crucial. But then, as I said, belief is everything. You need to believe in what you're doing. It's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. You're going to feel like giving up. But if you know or you are convinced, when you pitch an idea to a potential investor, you almost have to come across as slightly crazy. It's a bit like going for a grant interview at the Wellcome Trust or the Gates Foundation. You have to be so convinced that what you're doing is the right thing to do that it's borderline, crazy. Not crazy, but borderline crazy. And I think it's very important that you completely believe, because people see through a facade if you're being fake or if you're pretending. And I've found that oftentimes what gets investors interested in it is that they can tell how passionate I am about what we're trying to do, and that I completely believe that this is the right thing to do. And that can really go a long way in getting an investor or somebody or a team member. If you're trying to recruit team members to join, it's really about belief and the mission and the vision that you have. So with that, I'll end and say thank you very much. I hope it's been useful. And I'll be happy to take any questions and take part in any discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaw. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was excellent. I think it's the leap of faith and hoping that you're going to land in a soft place, but probably that's not how it ends up. But yeah, it's amazing what, it's all the things that we often think about and say, we don't have enough biotech in Africa, but it also takes people that are courageous like yourself to say, actually, maybe we just need to do it, whether we've got money or we know what we're doing, but we just go for it, and it sort of works out. So do we have any questions? I mean, I'm probably going to start just with a more sort of naive question on, so how did you come up with the name Yemaachi? What was behind that thinking?
Well, Yemaachi is actually an sort of a portmanteau, an amalgamation of 3 Ghanaian languages. So I was trying to do something that would not, of course, Africa, we're extremely linguistically diverse, and I didn't want to I thought it would be a bit sad to just pick a single language, even if it was my language. So Yem, in a language spoken in the north of Ghana, Frafra, means knowledge. Amachi in Ewe, which is spoken in the Volta region, so the east of Ghana, means drug or medicine. And then Machi, so the double A, is a greeting. It means good morning in Tree, which is the language I speak. So putting it together, Yemaachi signifies basically it means a new dawn for knowledge on health in Africa. So it's slightly contrived, but it also comes across as Japanese, which as a tech company is always useful, right? People are like, oh, I've gone to meetings where they're expecting to see a Japanese person, and they're slightly surprised that I show up as this, mixed race Black, African guy. But essentially, but that's what Yemaachi stands for. Yemaachi is a new dawn for health knowledge in Africa, and it's reflective, hopefully, of different parts of Ghana. But really, we aim to be reflective of the continent of Africa, and a global company that is headquartered and based and primarily works in Africa.
So I think there is a question. I mean, there's a lot of people congratulating you, but Joanne has a question. I'm not sure if it's possible to unmute.
Do you want me to allow people to unmute themselves?
Probably, that would be good.
Okay. They should be able to now.
But, I mean, the other question, perhaps while we're waiting for Johan, is perhaps just break it down to us. What is a Y
Can
combinator?
you hear me? Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm really impressed by this presentation. I mean, for African descent that has gone to Europe to do a PhD and always wanted to go back in the continent, this is really just wow. Like, okay, we can do a lot of things, and I want to congratulate you and your team for this. And I have a question regarding the plan you have made for this. I mean, what you are studying now, looking at partnership with other African countries to have access to breast cancer women, to have the genome of everyone. I'm curious, are you going to be on specific cities, or are you going in this country really all over the country? Because, Africa is really diverse. Even within one country, you have different cultures. So are you really going to go all over this country? And also, something I've noticed is that there's a lot of partnership between English-speaking African country. What's about the French part? Because I'm coming from a French part.
No, very good questions, both of them. We aim to go everywhere, but of course, everything costs money, so we have to start somewhere. The advantage we have is cancer care is so specialized that sometimes people from all over the country get fed into an urban area. So that's kind of why we are starting the way we are. In Ghana, for instance, there are only a handful. There are 2 comprehensive cancer hospitals, the whole country. So everybody who has cancer in a district hospital or something gets referred to these hospitals. So it gives us an advantage, and we kind of focus on these places, and we'll still get people drawn from across the country. But in larger countries like Nigeria and other places, we will be looking to try to have some regional interaction. So that's a very good point. As we scale up, God willing, we raise more money, then we have more resources and bigger teams to be able to do. But yes, the idea is to try to be as big and diverse as we can. With your other question about Francophone Africa, I agree with you entirely. It is something we want to do. We're only a year in. I mean, we've been operational since April 2021. So we've only done this for a year. So, hopefully if I give a talk like this next year, you will see, that we have expanded. But yes, it is certainly, we're not, I fully agree with you, and we're not trying to exclude. It's just, we start off where you have initial, you have existing relationships. So if you look, we've gone to Nigeria, which of course is just next door. And, we just kicked them out of the World Cup. So that's really, really nice. Sorry to any Nigerians who be on the call, too soon, # too soon, but I had to say it. But also Kenya, where of course I did a postdoc, and so I have good relationships. But over the coming months and years, we do look to expand considerably across other parts of Africa. So I'll be happy to talk to you on the side if you have ideas about where we could go from where you're from. Anybody listening who thinks Gabon, okay, I've never been to Gabon, I'd love to go. Yeah, so anywhere. Anybody listening who thinks I have a hospital there that has people with cancer, they may be interested, send me a message and I'll fly there and go and see if I can get them to work with us.
Yeah, congratulations again, and I'm looking forward to see where this company will go. Yeah, good luck.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
So Dennis had his hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Dr. Bediako does a nice job. Thank you very much, and congratulations for pushing Ghana in that sense. I just want to know, so as a Ghanaian, you are aware of centralization of things. How diverse is your heritage study that you have samples from Who Teaching Hospital or Tamale Teaching Hospital to include in your analysis? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get your question. If you could repeat it again, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, how diverse is the samples for the heritage study that we are sure that we are not getting samples from only Kolebu Teaching Hospital, but that's from Who Teaching Hospital or Tamale Teaching Hospital or anywhere else? I mean, you know what I mean. So as a Ghanaian, you know,
yeah. So Heritage is not a cancer study, and it's not a hospital-based study. So Heritage was actually recruiting people who were getting vaccinated. Because of resource and time constraints, we actually limited ourselves to Accra for that. Of course, Accra is a bit of a melting pot, so but for Heritage in particular, the idea was to go to vaccination centers and recruit people who were about to get vaccinated to join the study, and then they agreed to be followed up for 12 months. So just logistically, it would be impossible to go all over the country. So we just picked 3 health facilities in Accra. But what we're trying to do was go for a range of people from different socioeconomic and ethnic backgrounds. Obviously, Accra has a lot of people from different parts of the country. So for Heritage, we are limited, and that is a caveat of the study, but I think it's understandable. For the cancer work, we're very happy. We're already talking to people from Tamale, talking to people in the Volta region. If you have good connections, please put me in touch with them. For the Yemaachi's work, which is sort of ongoing, I want to have tentacles everywhere and to have people from all over the country and indeed all over the continent working with us. So it's just, once again, it's a matter of time and building those relationships, but we are very keen. And so if anyone here listens and says, I'd like to be part of it, or I have, some ideas, I'm happy to listen. You can reach me, yaw@yemaachi.com. It's very easy. So I'll put it in the chat perhaps so that everybody can see it.
Yeah. So while you're doing that, so I'm gonna take a question on the chat from Amanda Mason. So she's saying, hi, I have fantastic talk and interesting to hear about the team's journey and very inspiring. I just wanted to ask what you feel is the role of academic community or universities, both local and international, in feeding into biotech enterprises in Africa. Should university be more cognizant of their role as educators or incubators, i.e., what do you think is their role should be to sort of positively impact in facilitating this?
Very good question.
Sorry, I didn't know I could unmute, but I just want to say hi.
Go for
thanks
it,
for such a fantastic presentation. It's great. And I really think I also want to understand what the crux of this would to bridge out, whether it's about institutions or people. How are the structures meant to support each other? Or is this really about making sure that we network through these structures? Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are multiple ways to achieve this. And I think certainly academia has a big role to play, both as a source of talent to feed into this industry, but also potentially as an incubator itself. I think universities need to realize that, especially in African universities, need to realize that many of our students probably don't want to become professors. And we need to think of ways to adequately equip them, perhaps by partnering with business schools and entrepreneurial sort of leadership programs to provide some of that training to our students, because that is something that I personally didn't have, and I've had to sort of learn on the fly. It would have made the journey a bit easier if I had access to that training when I was sort of during my training days. So I think universities and academic institutions need to recognize that they should not be looking to have the monopoly on research. They should be looking to encourage private initiatives, because that can only make the ecosystem stronger and better, because it provides an outlet for all the academic research that is being done. So I think universities need to begin to look a bit more outward and a bit more non-traditionally. In Europe and North America, it took a long time for biotech to come out of universities. Now it's sort of taken for granted. I think Africa has to speed up that process. We cannot afford to finish developing our academic base before we think about biotech. We almost have to we have to do it in parallel. It's true we have a lot more to go in building academic capacity, but we can't afford to just put all our resources to academic and ignore the private sector, especially since our governments really don't give a lot of money towards research. And so researchers in our universities need to think, researchers themselves need to look outward and think more entrepreneurially about how they can support their work, as opposed to simply depending on the traditional grant schemes. Because as COVID has taught us, when things get tight elsewhere, the first things they cut are the grants to African science. I myself lost a £300,000 grant from the Royal Society because ODA was cut, right? So I was awarded the grant, but it came with no money because the British government had cut funding to the Royal Society for their grant program. That is not a situation that any African scientist should allow themselves to be in. If I didn't have Yemaachi, that would have been potentially career devastating. Because I had Yemaachi, it was still annoying, but I could laugh about it. I can laugh about it now because it was, in a way, I didn't need it anymore. But for other people who were depending on that, it was really, really quite devastating and really shook, shook them. So I think we have to, I hope it answers your question, but I think the universities have to look more outward, have to be more creative, and have to be looking to partner with the private sector as opposed to competing or maybe worse, keeping it down.
So Fabrice had a question from Burkina Faso. Fabrice, do you want to come on now? Otherwise, you could take a question from Leopold, who's saying that, are you planning
I can speak.
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's really fantastic to listen to you. I have two questions, one personal and the other one that I put on the chat. So the personal one is, having Yemaachi, have you kept your position at the university, and how are you managing both, if that's the case? The second question is really, you are now able to have access to human genome with your sequencing capacity, with the focus first on cancer, but having access to human genome could enable you to tackle beyond cancer. How are you trying to leverage, your access to be able to tackle comorbidity, say, non-communicable disease, even infectious diseases that are still, susceptibility, human host susceptibility also drive infectious disease? Thank you.
You're welcome. So yeah, first of all, I have maintained a position at the university, but I've transitioned to an adjunct position. I couldn't maintain a full-time faculty position and be full-time CEO of Yemaachi. So my full-time affiliation is now Yemaachi, but I maintain an adjunct position at the university. So I still teach certain courses when I have the time. And I actually still have PhD students that I'm supervising. We will see with time how much of that I can continue to carry, because obviously as Yemaachi grows, I have a lot of responsibilities, but I'm hoping to keep a certain element of my academic life going. I personally enjoy it, and I think it's important that I maintain a link with the university to try to build a prototype for what we're advocating for, which is this academia feeding into private enterprise and working collaboratively. And that requires certain bridge points. A number of my team are faculty at the university and are still maintaining those positions. So that, to answer your first question. Secondly, of course, we are very interested in comorbidities. You cannot, you can never study something in exclusion. So, cancer is obviously impacted by environment, by genetic susceptibility, by co-infection with other things. If you think about HPV and cervical cancer, for instance, a very good example. So we are interested in some of that, but what trying to start a business also teaches you is that if you try to do too much too quickly, you end up doing nothing at all. And so we're initially trying to be focused. In time, if things go really well and Yemaachi becomes the behemoth that I imagine it might be one day, yeah, we may have multiple divisions and focus on different things. But there is something to be gained by building specialist knowledge in a particular area. But it does not, like I said, we are open to other, like we're doing heritage, which is a COVID study, has nothing to do with cancer. We're open to certain areas that can make sense on a broad scientific level. But I would encourage everybody, when you're thinking, if you want to do something like this, in an academic setting, you can afford to have a broad portfolio and dabble in many different things, provided you can get grants for them. But in biotech, you need to be careful you don't have too much mission creep, as they call it, because it confuses investors, it confuses the market, it confuses everybody, and you spread yourself too thin. So for now, we're trying to be focused, but with time, as we scale up, there will be avenues to expand. And cancer is very diverse, so we are interested in looking at a number of things within cancer. But that's a very good point. Thank you.
Cool. And Fabrice? I think you can unmute. Yeah. Are you able to unmute, Fabrice? So, okay.
She should be able to.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I said that I'm Fabrice Some from Burkina Faso. I'm a PhD student. I'm working in immunology. And I would like to thank Mr. Bediako for his presentation. And I'm apologize for my English. My English is not very well like him. And my question is, I would like to know if you collaborate with a researcher in Burkina Faso in the breast cancer domain, because in this life here in Burkina Faso, we have many women who are affected by this disease. And I would like to know if your laboratory have a collaboration with our researcher here, maybe to have a sample for the development of new tool diagnose or probably a treatment. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrice. Very good question, and your English is much better than my French, so no need to apologize.
You should never apologize.
Exactly. We currently do not, although through WACBIP, we have collaborations actually doing some COVID work in Burkina Faso. But I would certainly be very interested in exploring cancer in Burkina Faso. So if you know of, feel free to email me if you know of someone or you yourself are interested. As I said, we're looking to expand our network, and a network is people. So I'm certainly very interested. We currently are not, but I don't see why not. It's just north. We can even drive to Burkina Faso from here. So I think it would be great to explore that if you have any contacts or you have any insights.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. And I'm guessing that you obviously it's not limited to breast cancer, because I saw one question here that you're looking at all types of cancers, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we're not limited to breast cancer. We currently have a project in breast cancer. It's one of the ones we started, but we are interested in all types of cancers. Obviously, prioritizing cancers that are most prevalent in our part of the world. But yes, interested in all types of cancer over the coming years.
Right. Do we have any other questions? But I think it would be quite interesting as an exercise to really draft a small little ABCs on how to start a company in Africa. I think that's something that, because I think a lot of people just think it's if you think your universities are bureaucratic, probably biotech, at least as a thinking, is that it's probably more bureaucratic than that. But maybe a simple ABC could be very helpful.
Sure. I mean, I don't claim to be an expert. I'm still probably making lots of mistakes. I was fortunate to find a team of people. Two of my co-founders are actually non-scientists, sort of more business. One is a tech person, one is a finance person. So I've learned from them. And that's what I mean by team. If you are the scientist, you probably need to find somebody with business experience, with finance experience, to complement you, so that you can, but it is not without its challenges, but it's not entirely tedious. I mean, registering a company is actually probably the easiest thing you will do. It's getting people to actually put money into the company and then building the structure as you go. And obviously, as you scale, then your operations and your governance structure will mature and become more and more complex and legal and all those things. But initially, just think of an idea, registering a company. Even in Ghana, it takes a day or two, and most of it is now online. But so it's not the act of registering is really not the challenge. But just registering a company doesn't mean you have a successful business. Even just raising money doesn't mean you're successful. And those are the things you have to really. The thought has to go, I think, into what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? And why do you think it's a successful business? model, because not everything that is worthwhile is going to be commercially viable. And I think that's something that scientists, we have to think about. Everything, most things in research are worthwhile, right? It's good to understand, it's good to know, but only a subset of that is currently going to be commercially viable. And if it's a business, then it has to be commercially viable, at least eventually. So I think that is the challenge, and then being able to defend it and stand by it and explain to people why you think you have an opportunity for a commercially viable business. And one thing, the YC slogan is build something people want. At the end of the day, you're only viable if someone is willing to pay or to, think about a company. A company is meant to sell something. So even if it's in science and it's not a direct, transaction, the product you are producing has to be one that people want. And so identifying your market, identifying who those people are, identifying what they want and how you provide something they want, all goes into building a successful business, no matter what it is. And I think in biotech, because of the technicalities involved, you have to think through that very carefully. It's not always very straightforward. I think we are still figuring it out. But those would be the things I would begin to think about, as opposed to worrying too much about jumping through hoops to register your company. That is just following instructions. We do that very well as scientists. The harder part is figuring out, what is my company going to do, and how is my company actually going to eventually be profitable so that people might invest in it.
Well, I guess my other question would be, how challenging is that? Because I guess generally it's even more difficult in Africa to convince anyone that you can do anything, that innovation, for example, not just, because we have cohorts and stuff, but how difficult is it to actually convince investors that this is something that can be done in Africa and that you have capacity to do it?
Oh, it's difficult. I mean, I won't. I were times where I thought I would quit because it was just no after no after no. But you learn where to go. So it's not so it's difficult, but not impossible. But you also have to recognize that you have to get good at it. We are used to giving talks as scientists. We're used to going to a conference and giving talks to an audience of scientists. So we talk about your flow cytometry, you talk about your CD4s and your CD8s, and you think, you're really communicating and everybody loves your presentation, but you're speaking to an audience of very informed people who understand everything you're talking about. When you are a technical founder is basically someone with technical expertise who is trying to found a company, like I did. You have to realize that your new audience are lay people, very wealthy, but lay people, right? And yet, because they are so successful in their areas of work, they don't like to be made to feel stupid. So you can't come in there and try and, you have to wow them with your science. So they think, wow, he's a really smart guy or lady. But don't make them feel stupid about it, because then you just upset them and then they'll be like, whatever, you think you're so smart. At the same time, you have to communicate, at times, a very complex scientific idea or model to them in a way that breaks it down and makes it very simple without insulting their intelligence. So it's a very challenging thing to do. I mean, you come in there talking about a genome, they may not even understand what a genome is. Now you're talking about why African genomes are so valuable and why we should care. But so each time you go, you iterate, you get better at pitching. And so that's my personal journey. I'm now much better at communicating to a lay audience the intricacies of why cancer research in Africa is something viable. But you learn what works and you learn what doesn't. You have to stay humble and not get too frustrated. But that is the challenge. It's communicating to an uninformed audience, or at least a non-scientific audience, why what you want to do is important. And I think a good way is to get advice. That find advisors who are already in biotech or who are in business, pitch to them, give a friendly audience sort of thing, get them to give you constructive criticism. And then hone your pitch. It's an art, I don't recommend going to pay anybody to teach you how to pitch. I think that's a waste of money. It's like all these self-help stuff, but practice. And don't think of it like giving a scientific talk. It's not like going to ASTMH or wherever to give a talk. It's a different audience. What you need to communicate is very different. But it's doable. I mean, I think, like I said, I think my PhD training prepared me to assimilate information quickly. I just had to accept that I knew nothing about what I was trying to do, and so just get down to learning it. And so now I can talk relatively confidently about KPIs and, you know, convertible notes and all this stuff that sounded like jargon to me. But like I said, I also had a team of people who had more experience in this area than I did, and they propped me up. As the CEO of a young company, you will have to do most of the pitching. No one is going to follow you if you are a bad CEO, but you have a really good CFO or a really good, you know, technical person. As a CEO, you have to be able to communicate. So early stages, seed round, Series A, the burden is on you to communicate the vision. But if you have a good team that helps you prepare, then you have a better chance. So that's been my experience. I'm still learning, but yeah, that would be my advice.
Ooh, thank you very much. Yeah, I think everyone thoroughly enjoyed that. And I'm glad that you're the first person to actually give this webinar series. And I hope that the next people that are going to come on would also, you know, inspire us like you have inspired us. Thank you very much. And also I thank the rest of the team, the SAIS exec, for organizing, and all the people that have done lots of different things. Yeah, and also Yemaachi Biotech for supporting us and sponsoring. Yeah, thank you, Al. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you too. I hope everybody, wish everybody success in their own scientific endeavors. And yeah, I think Africa is there for the taking, and it should be taken by us Africans. So I think we just need to just do it, as Nike would say. But yeah, I hope this has been useful, and please reach out. I'm happy to collaborate, even if you're not based. As I said, we're building partnerships in the US and in Europe. So if you're a US based scientist, whether you're African or not, but you're interested in the kind of stuff we're trying to do, I'm very happy to also engage. It's only that by working together that we will achieve real change. So happy to work with anybody who is interested. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Cheers.